Okay, good morning, everyone. I'm hoping that folks can hear me. If somebody could be so kind as to say whether or not you can hear me in the chat room, I'd really appreciate it. Awesome, thank you. So give us a couple of minutes. I'm just going to make sure that any stragglers come into the room and have a chance to settle in with their lunch if they're in Eastern time like I am, and off we'll go. So just give me a couple more minutes here. All right. Prab, I repositioned the microphone, so I'm hoping that there's a little less of an echo. This room has a lot of hard surfaces in it, so unfortunately, it probably will be a bit echoey. Was that any better? Okay. Great. Well, in that case, let's get started. So my name is Joseph, and I work for Canada's Open Data Exchange, and I wanted to welcome everybody to our first webinar. I'm really excited to talk about open data and how you can use it in your business to build products, to market a service, and to just use things and run your business more effectively. Just so everybody knows, I've got about 20 minutes of prepared comments, about 25 slides. I wanted to let everyone know that they're welcome to ask questions. For those of you who are unfamiliar with Crowdcast, you'll notice that underneath the video player, there is a Ask Questions button. So you can see Ask Question or Suggest the Topic. And as I go through the presentation, feel free to hit the button, ask a question, or upvote a question that somebody else had already submitted. So that's kind of cool. I'll also try and, oh dear. Let me try one more thing. Thank you so much, Thomas. Still a problem? Huh. All right, well, I'm just going to power through then, guys. Let me make sure I'm using the right microphone too. Okay. Thanks, everyone. I love this. People are telling me what they're hearing. So as I said, I'll have about 20 minutes of talking, ask a question using the tool. I'll try and keep an eye on the chat. I will also switch over to only the slideshow so that you don't have to see my talking head for the entire 20-minute presentation. And we'll go from there. Thank you so much for taking some time out of your day to do this. I know folks are very busy, and this is a lot of fun for me. So here we go. All right, so today we're going to cover what open data is, how companies are using it, what ODX is and what it is that we do. We're going to have 3 examples of companies that have been creating value on top of open data quite successfully. I'm then going to spend some time walking folks through a hands-on example of how to use open data and how to get started. And then I'll have some calls to action for folks in the private sector who are interested in using open data and just doing interesting things with data in general, because there are some things that we as ODX can really use your help on as well. Prab, to your question, so the slides will be available. There will be a video archive. And if you need any other information, you can also just find us through the ODX website, and I'll have contact information at the end. If you want the PowerPoint, I'm happy to make that available as well. Great. So first of all, what is open data? So there are a few definitions that have been set, but the one that we prefer to use is the following, and that is that a piece of data is open if anyone is free to reuse it, use it, redistribute it, subject only to the requirement to attribute the source of the information and or some share-alike license. There are a few different definitions, but this is the one that I think is the most specific and yet still relatively flexible in terms of what open data is and what people actually do with it. To put it differently, it's data that's just made available to anyone who can use it for any purpose. Open data is a key component in the idea of open government. The idea that wherever possible, government should make and execute policy in full public view as a way to ensure transparency and as a way to ensure accountability. As you might gather, open data is often produced by governments. In Canada, that includes the federal government, the provinces, the territories, municipalities, and First Nations. That said, open data is not necessarily government data. There are lots of cases where companies or other organizations release data sets with no restrictions. Sometimes they do it as a transparency measure, like in cases where they're trying to demonstrate that a company has an equitable hiring process. Other times they release it as a marketing tool or as part of an API. One way to think of open data is at one end of a spectrum. And so if you look at this slide, we go from closed to open. And on the left-hand side, we've got what you would traditionally think of as personal or commercial or otherwise proprietary and protected data. It's available only to authorized users. Maybe it's protected by statute and it's things like national security data, or, for an individual, it's things like your banking information. At the other end of the continuum, you get closer and closer to the definition of open data, data that's shared on the internet in some standard format and can be made available to anyone. And in between, you can see data sets that you might want to share selectively. This could be a customer list that you share with a partner, financial records that you share with a service provider, or paid access that you offer to a specific data set provided under license. So, this notion of shared data covers things like the AC Nielsen's, the Thomson Reuters, the Bloombergs of the world, the companies that build these large data sets, maintain them in some case in real time, and make them available for a fee. And as you look at the top of the slide, you can get a sense of how the users might change for these different data sets from a very small group to basically anyone in the world. So I want to pause here and just see if there are any questions on this idea of there being a spectrum of data availability from closed to open. Anyone have any questions or concerns about that? All right. So as you probably sense, open data and data sharing in general isn't new. Companies using open data for profit isn't a new concept. Companies have already built billion-dollar businesses on open data, even though in many cases we don't think of these places as data companies. So if you look at Intuit, TurboTax is built primarily on the public release of tax rules as structured data, as well as as just PDFs that you can use to build a calculation off of. The Weather Network in Canada is based on one of the oldest forms of government open data, which is weather data, weather reports, weather forecasts, weather warnings. Garmin, of course, is a very heavy user of open data. A lot of open data is geospatial data and vice versa. And so a lot of these companies will use data sets that were collected and made open by government, or collected and at least made available under license by government. And then Zillow, for those of you who aren't familiar, is a real estate website in the US that is a very heavy user of open geospatial data, tax rolls, and other real estate data to help people buy, sell, and value a home. So we don't generally think of open data companies, or we don't generally think of these as open data companies, but in a sense they are. So given that data sharing has been happening for a while, and that open data is not that new of a concept, why are we talking about this now? What's the opportunity? Well, a lot of what's changing is government. Governments in Canada and the world are moving to this idea of open by default. The open by default principle is a bit hard to describe, but the idea is this. The government collects and maintains vast stores of data in the course of its daily business. Everything from who says what in legislative proceedings to individual property tax and vehicle registration records. And when you think about it, all of this data was collected for the benefit of citizens and at their expense. And the data itself is actually valuable. So wherever possible, let's make it available to the people who paid for it. You can look at what Ontario does, and Ontario specifically, which is where we're based, goes a bit further. In Ontario, all data must be made public unless it's specifically exempted for legal, privacy, security, confidentiality, or commercially sensitive reasons. So philosophically, you can get the idea that everything should be open. Practically, of course, there are a bunch of kinds of data that we don't want governments to open up, particularly data that has a lot of personally identifiable information in it. But at least in theory, it's there. And why is it there? Well, from a governance perspective, it creates transparency. The idea is that a better informed public can create better government. And as I said, the second reason is this notion that data has value. Data is, in a sense, the new currency, the new national resource. Big data, machine learning, and artificial intelligence can make it useful. And open data can be used by citizens and organizations to create products and services that create innovation, jobs, and growth. And that brings me to ODX and to what it is that we do. So I work for Canada's Open Data Exchange, or ODX. We're a public-private partnership that is uniquely focused on data innovation and on the commercialization of open data. We were founded in May of last year and are largely funded by the Government of Canada as well as our founding private sector partners. We're based in Waterloo, Ontario. Personally, I come from a long career in consumer technology product management. I've built and run organizations that build consumer technology products at Yahoo in the US and other places in Canada, and that generate and use an awful lot of data. I'm the data executive in residence here at ODX, which means that I spend my time creating and running programs like this to help companies build value off their open data and advising companies on their use of open data and on their data strategy in general. One thing I'll call out now is that if you have any interest in following up, my contact information is in the deck. I can be reached through the CODX website. And I'll also say that I'm not just interested in talking about things related to open data. I'm very interested in talking to things to people about things related to data in general. So there are a lot of companies in the startup ecosystem nationally that are looking for advice on implementing big data solutions, setting up AWS, setting up Azure, various pieces of infrastructure. And we at ODX have a pretty good network of companies that have already done a lot of big data deployments, AI and machine learning. And so if you got a data question in general, whether or not it has anything to do with open data and whether it's technical or business, please feel free to reach out to me. And I'm pretty sure I'll be able to help. So that's a bit about me and a bit about ODX. So to make this real, I'll talk through an example of how we engage. So, in most cases, a prospective client or an ODX member comes to us with an idea or a specific data need. We'll work with them to take that specific idea or that specific need and try and turn it into a broader opportunity that we can help with. So, for example, a home improvement retailer might come to us looking for sources of open weather data that they can use to build better marketing campaigns and sales forecasting models. Home improvement retail tends to be very seasonal, very weather driven, and very climate driven. And so Lowe's, Home Depot, and Canadian Tire spend a lot of money trying to understand how weather, climate, and the broader economic picture is going to evolve over time and how that's going to drive their business. So we'll typically work with a company like that to identify other potential open data sets of interest. Things like existing home sales, building permits, information on new household formation, that sort of thing. Where we're looking for something that is already open data, It's usually just a matter of me or one of my colleagues finding the relevant data set and the relevant owner in government and providing those data sets to the company. The nice thing about ODX being a public-private partnership, though, is that we do have relationships with all the provinces as well as the federal government. And a lot of times you'll find data sets where you know that some part of the government has it because logically they have to have it in order to do their job. But that data set doesn't exist as, a nice JSON API sitting on the Government of Canada Open Data Portal. So in cases like that, we can usually intercede on behalf of the company and find folks in government with direct access to the piece of data, so we can just basically get a static copy of it. And this has happened a couple of times with municipal data, for example, where we've had a client that had an interest in building permit information, and the municipality they were interested in didn't release it through an open data portal. So in that case, we can just find the person responsible for open government in that city and make the request and get the data to them. And yeah, down the road, there'll be an API and they'll do a proper release. But in the meantime, I can at least get folks up and running. Is data free? So by definition, open data is free. Government data is generally free in Canada, but there are a lot of exceptions. And so when you're looking at things like data from Statistics Canada, where it's very detailed census data, some of that is fee for service. Likewise with geo data, but we can get into that more. So just to finish this example, we'll get the data sets together. We'll advocate for the release of more relevant data. We'll then provide the company with tools and training in some cases to get them up and running using the particular system. As I said, we've got a pretty good network of professionals that can do interesting things with data, so we can generally make introductions. And then eventually the company will be able to develop a hypothesis, build a marketing plan around it, and test that plan and bring it to market. So we're really about getting this external data into companies and getting them off and running. And Sunit, yes, we do have a request process. I'll show it to you in the presentation, but you can also find it on codx.ca. So why would someone want to do this? Well, open data can be used in a number of ways. It can be used to create new products and services, to improve a business process, to making better data-driven decisions, and to solving complex problems. And I'm going to walk through a couple examples of those as well. And Julia, yes, there is the Government of Canada Open Data Portal, which I'm going to show you a little later, but it's very similar to data.gov, if a little more limited in scope. So Pinpoint. Pinpoint helps multi-location retail and food service companies decide where to locate restaurants or stores. So if you think of your Starbucks or Tim Hortons, your McDonald's, these companies spend an inordinate amount of money identifying promising locations and deciding where to invest. And so Pinpoint is a product that is based primarily on open data and ingests an enormous amount of data from municipalities, states, provinces, all layers of government in both Canada and the US, and then builds prediction models on top of that open data. And so this is something that traditionally had been done only by the largest property developers and the largest retailers and restaurant chains, and typically was done in-house by very expensive teams. But what Pinpoint has done was ingest a whole bunch of open data and make this available through a SaaS model and then do it in a very efficient way. So it's if you're familiar with GIS, geographic information systems, it's effectively that, but done in a much more intuitive way, primarily based on open data. While I'm on this slide, I'm curious: is there anybody on the webinar right now who actually works in government, not in private sector? I promise not to be mean. Okay, so I guess not. So you'll notice these yellow bubbles that describe how government can help. Sometimes when I do these presentations, there are folks from government in the room on the sort of data supply side, and that's why they're there. But I won't talk about them again. So that was Pinpoint. Another company that makes great use of open data as the core of their business model is a company out of Toronto called Think Data Works. They take a slightly different approach and address a very different market. One of the most data intensive industries is financial services, specifically asset management. Now, asset managers are the folks that run mutual funds, pension funds, hedge funds. They basically decide where to invest. Companies like that need up-to-the-minute market information, and they traditionally buy it at great expense from companies like Thomson Reuters and Bloomberg. But they're also constantly looking for new sources of data and new ways to incorporate it in their prediction models. To help that happen, what Think Data Works does is ingest millions of open data sets from governments, primarily in Canada and the US, rearrange those data sets into standardized formats, and then make that data available behind the firewall for these large financial services companies and these asset managers. This gives the asset managers a really simple, clean, up-to-the-minute accurate data set that they can load directly into whatever tool they're using to do programmatic trading or to build their portfolio forecasts. So it's, again, this is something that traditionally was very difficult to build, maybe couldn't even be built at all. And what Think Data Works has done is inserted itself into the data value chain, pulled all this information together, and made it really easy for somebody sitting within Citibank or TD to use every day. It's a simple idea, but it's really well executed, and it's doing a lot for a lot of interesting companies. And the third example is a company from British Columbia called Nomos. Nomos has set out to improve how law is practiced and to also improve the public's access to justice. And what they have done is they've ingested all of the provincial legislation for British Columbia, as well as much of the court rulings, charge data, and all kinds of information on how the law is created and applied, both criminal and civil. So not only can you navigate cases, the law, and contracts using a wonderful visualization and UI, but you can also use Nomos to effectively build legal strategies. So if you are a corporate lawyer, or if you're if you're in public practice, you can pull together threads of legal logic that you can then use either in a court case or an arbitration, or to inform the contract that you're trying to write for a particular case. So this is this wonderful case where Nomos has created this thing by adding a lot of structure and intelligence on data that the province of British Columbia has recently released, and then made some subset of that available to the public for free to improve access to justice. Obviously, a lawyer's time is very expensive, and so you can imagine that Nomos is able to sell this solution for a lot of money to law firms as well as to companies that just spend a lot on in-house counsel. It's also a really nice fusion of artificial intelligence, natural language processing, and data visualization to build something very useful to business. So having walked through those examples, I wanted to take a step back and talk a little bit about who has what. So Julia alluded to data.gov, which is a federal government initiative in the United States. In Canada, we have a similar situation where the federal government has taken a lead on a lot of this, but because they're not responsible for the delivery of a lot of services, they don't have all the data. So, I want you to think back to high school, if you went to high school in Canada, and think back to your Canadian geography or social studies class. And we're going to do what we call data discovery, which is identifying who owns which data set and how to dig it up. Which reminds me, I'm curious, is anyone in the room not in Canada or, working for a Canadian company? I'm just curious. I won't kick you out. Okay, interesting. So as we probably all remember, each level of government in Canada has a different set of responsibilities. And this is important because, for the most part, the data you can get from each level of government is dictated by the responsibilities that that level of government has. So you have to remember that outside of a few agencies like Statistics Canada, most of the government doesn't collect data for the sake of collecting data. They collect it as a side effect in the course of running programs or regulating some area of activity. So to find open data, it helps for you to try and trace back what you need to the piece of the government apparatus that's responsible for it. And as you can see, weather and climate data is collected by the federal government. Healthcare and education are managed by the provinces. And a lot of the physical services that people use, like water and many roads, are managed by the municipality. So before I move on, does anyone have any questions on this point in terms of what level of government is responsible for what particular thing? Or is there an example of a data set you're looking for where it might not be clear who owns what? Aviation, that's a good one. So off the top of my head, it's primarily federal. Aviation is also one of those weird ones in that a lot of the job of running the aviation system has been privatized in NavCan, but it's transportation in general is a federal responsibility. And yeah, Kirsten, healthcare is provincial. And the thing about healthcare that you have to remember as well is that because of all the privacy implications around it, it's sometimes tricky to get at even aggregated data, but it is there and it is a provincial responsibility. And so I don't, off the top of my head, know where I could find a list of Canadian municipalities, but we may be able to pull something together from the different provinces, so we can follow up afterwards. And obviously, you know, folks, I'm around. You can email me. You can find us on the website and ask these questions as well. That's a lot of what we're here for. So with that said, Arjumand, so that's a really good point. So the question is that, or the observation is that census info is generally outdated by a couple of years at least. Is there any way to make that kind of information more current? So there are companies that are taking different approaches. Most of them involve collecting samples that can be applied on top of census data to make predictions or draw inferences about how things have changed from one year to another. And so to give you an example, I believe that census data includes information on household income. And obviously that's very stale because the full census is only run every so often. But what you can do is you can take that as a baseline, and then you can use things like data from the CRA, Canada Revenue Agency, in terms of taxable household income, which is updated every year and is generally made available much more recently. And you can basically layer it on top of the census data to draw conclusions about how the income in a particular neighborhood is changing from one year to another. And that's a lot of what Pinpoint does, for example, is basically take this huge baseline of data from the census and then build different predictive models on top of it, or use other data sources to fill in gaps so that they can understand what has happened in the years since the census. I will say that one thing that ODX is here for is to advocate to government around what the priority data sets are. And so the government kind of embraced this notion of being open by default and has this to-do list of data sets to be released and is kind of grinding through it. But historically, they haven't really prioritized that based on the value of that data. So what we can do as ODX is, again, kind of intercede on behalf of companies and point out to the federal government or to the provinces that, hey, this data set is really valuable. This one isn't. So could you release this one first? And that's how we can try and fill in some of these gaps and get data that's updated more frequently with more recency. So I'm going to walk through a really brief example of finding a useful data set on the internet. And I'm going to try something a little risky. I'm going to try doing this live because, well, I'm on the internet, so why the heck not? Let's see if I can share a different window now. 1 second here. All right, there I am. And let's see if I can share a browser. There we go. It's the future. So I'm using a very secret tool. You may have heard of it. It's called Google. And I say that half jokingly, but 90% of the time, people will start an open data search with Google and then quickly drill into what they want. So if you know that you're looking for open data already, you can just go Canada. And the first result that you'll get is the Open Government website, which is effectively the Canadian equivalent of data.gov. And if we click through to that, you'll get a little bit of information from the federal government on open data. And you can then search every data set that the federal government has made available as open data. So a couple of things to keep in mind. First of all, this is only federal data. And that's important because, as I pointed out earlier, a lot of data falls into provincial jurisdiction and so won't appear in the federal government's portal. There is a list of every open data portal in Canada. It is, I admit, pretty annoying that you have to go and search them individually, but you do right now. I'll also say that not all the provinces have their own data portal. So like Saskatchewan, for example, doesn't have one at the moment. Ontario has one and it's fairly good. But if it's something that's in federal jurisdiction, you're pretty well covered. If it's something that's in the provincial jurisdiction, you can use the province's portals. Some are easier to use than others. So if you have questions or you're frustrated, just let me know and I can usually point you in the right direction. But in this case, I'm going to try search real quick. And so, you can do things like keyword search. And this, by the way, is just searching the metadata. So you're searching, you'll get a list of different data sets that are available. And the search engine's not too bad and pretty exhaustive. One thing you'll notice is that the data formats are all over the place. So you'll see that some things, in this case, a lot of these are only offered as PDFs, which is not very useful, but you can at least see the information in the PDF. But I'll come up with something better from StatsCan. So I'll look for merchandise imports. So here is merchandise import and export custom-based price indexes. So it's the prices of different imports, different imported products and services. And you can see here that, again, it's available as XML, as well as a CSV file, as well as just as a web page. If you click through on it, you'll see a longer description of it and then links to the individual data sets. For those of you who are developers or are sort of technically inclined, there is an API that you can use to search the same thing that I'm searching through a query box. So you can kind of build your own search on top of it if you wanted to. And then we can take a look at one of the data sets. So this one is available as a CSV file. And well, maybe I'll just navigate to the XML one and see what happens. Unfortunately, they zip the files up, so I have to unzip it here to show it to you. If you give me 1 sec. I'll just flip over to that window. And so here is your actual data. So you can see, if you're familiar with XML, you can see that it's kind of a messy XML file with a particular value for a particular time period. CSV might be a little more familiar to people, so I'll just open that up. Or better yet, I'll just show it to you from the slide deck. And this will give you a sense of what you actually get back. So comma separated file, you can load it into Excel, you can load it into Refine Pro, you can load it into any number of tools, and you can then go to town and load it into your marketing tool, apply it to your CRM and so on. So this is, I got to admit, it's a pretty low level technical example, but you can kind of understand the workflow now of finding out what kind of data you want, identifying what parts of the government may have it, and then drilling into individual data sets to see what's actually there. And if all else fails, you can just ask me. So there's this form on our website that kicks off a workflow, so we can respond pretty quickly, point people in the right direction, get them example data sets, connect them with other vendors, or frankly, just peers that are trying to do similar things, and get them off and running. So any questions on that very, very brief tour of getting an open data set and having a look at it? Perhaps that's a really good question. No, we don't. So ODX is it's a member-supported organization with a lot of funding from the federal and the provincial government. So at the moment, we'll charge for specific events. So, and this is my commercial, for those of you that are interested in the workflow that I just did and would like to spend more time on that, we are running a workshop on September 13th here in Waterloo region. Happy to tell you more about it, and that will be, I believe, $800 for a one-day workshop where it's nothing but this, like working with open data, understanding the data that's valuable to your business, and so on. But in terms of just helping you find data sets, we don't charge. No, that's part of our mandate. I'll send Arjun. I'll send out the link afterwards. I don't have it handy, but I'll definitely send you that list of all the data sets. And then Anton, we can help with that as well. So there are a couple of pages that are good lists of every municipal open data set in Canada. They're always going to be incomplete. So a lot of times you have to figure out what municipalities you're interested in and either knock on doors or come to me and I can help you knock on doors, because I have pretty good relationships with a lot of different municipalities. And also, at least in Canada, all the municipal open data people kind of know each other. So if you're in Ontario, you can go through, you talk to the Toronto person and you talk to me, and then you talk to 4 other people and you've got the entire province covered. And so right now we're based in Communitech, but we're going to be moving to the new Uptown Data Hub towards the end of the year, which is based in Uptown Waterloo. So a call to action to cap this off. So I think if you're a business person and you're working in marketing, product design, engineering, anything that has to do with knowing your customer or improving the operation of your business, then there's an opportunity to benefit from data that's outside of your organization, which means that there's probably an opportunity to benefit from open data. And so I would say, take the time to understand the breadth of government data that is available. And when in doubt, just think about any data that the government probably collects that would not compromise privacy, security, or confidentiality. Because if you can think of that universe of data, the odds are that it can be released, and it's just a question of either finding it on an open data portal or working our way through the system together to identify who has the data and get it released. Because for the most part, they should be able to release it. I would also say experiment with the open data portals. So the federal government one and then the provincial ones that I'll send around afterwards. Think about new products, services, and new ways of doing business that you can do with data. And finally, begin and maintain a dialogue with other businesses about open data. And I know that people are sometimes reluctant to do this for competitive reasons. But I will say that when you look at it from the data set perspective, there are probably a lot of other companies out there that are not in a competitive space that are using the same kind of data. So with respect to the geospatial stuff like traffic counts or things like that, there are definitely a lot of companies out there that are already using it that are probably not competitive. And To the extent that we as ODX can connect you with them, please let me know, because I definitely want to make sure people are there to help each other. And then contact us for help. So as I said, if you have questions, if you have ideas, please reach out to me. That's what I'm here for. A large part of my OKRs are based on the number of contacts and the number of companies that we help with open data. And one thing that's not on this slide is I will be sending out a follow-up survey later today or tomorrow. I would really appreciate it if you tried to fill it out. It should only take a minute or two, but we want to make sure that we're delivering programming that people find useful. So anything you can tell us about, what I've talked about that wasn't relevant, or things that you would like me to talk about that I haven't talked about, please let me know, because we're very, very keen to evolve our programming and reach as many companies as possible. Julia, so except for governments of different levels, are there any providers of open data? Yes, there definitely are. So there are a lot of organizations that are, in the broader public sector, but there are also some private companies that provide open data. I don't have that list in front of me right now, but I can kind of give you some examples of companies where they'll provide a data set almost as lead generation, right? Where, hey, here's a data set that's useful to the public that is some slice of what it is that we have available. So we can use this to get other companies to start using our services and to start paying us for other data sets. So there are definitely other providers of open data. And then there are also intermediaries like Think Data Works or Quandl, or different companies that aggregate open data and make some of it available for free, and then have value-added services that sit on top of it. So again, please reach out. And as I said, there are a few of you that have identified yourself as being at a company that probably uses open data. So we're in the process of running the OD 150, which is a survey that is attempting to build a list of 150 companies in Canada that make commercial use of open data. We started this at the beginning of May, and we are up to about 70 companies, which is great. We gave ourselves a year to hit 150, and I think we'll do it much quicker than that. We're doing it because, I'm a product manager at heart, and I want to know what companies are doing with data and how we can better serve them. And the way to do that is to get a pretty good list of everybody who's using open data already, and to understand what their problems are and how we can address those challenges. So please, if you use open data, fill this out. If you know people that use open data, send it to them. I'd really appreciate it. And we'll send you a gold USB stick, and we'll send you some information, some research that we put together around how people are using data. So that's my deck. I'm happy to stick around for as long as folks like, and answer any questions. I'll flip back to the slide with my contact information and our contact information. Definitely follow us on Twitter. Definitely check out our website. We have a LinkedIn group that's fairly active. We are quite active on Twitter. There's a lot happening in open data right now, so we're constantly publishing and retweeting things. And yes, any questions, as I said, I'm going to stick around for a little while, so please feel free to drop me a note in chat, or ask it in the tool, or then just email me afterwards. Fantastic, Prob. So I'm going to turn off the video now, but I'll stick around and chat for a little while. Cheers.